Hello everyone and welcome to another video in our Rooted series through the book of James. We took a bit of a break last week just because I wanted everyone to take an opportunity to listen to Pastor Tim's sermon on biblical justice. And if you haven't done that yet, I'd encourage you to take a look. But today we're going to be continuing on through the book of James, and we're coming up to a subject that I knew was coming. And I knew that when we got to it, it was going to feel very, very timely. It was going to feel like this passage just has so much to say about the situation we find ourselves in right now. But before we get into it, I'm going to share a personal story with you guys that helps you hopefully understand this whole idea a bit more. So a few years ago, I started meeting for Bible study with a gentleman from our church, a guy who was retired. And we used to email back and forth ahead of our Bible study times just to make sure that we were still on track for our Friday morning study at Coffee Culture downtown. And what he would always do at the end of his emails would say, "I'll see you Friday morning, 7 a.m., DV." And I never really knew what the DV meant, right? So eventually I looked it up online and I realized that what it stood for was Deo Volente, which really just means God willing, or if God wills it in Latin. And so I was confused at first, and I continue to be confused because I was thinking, well, we're not talking about something that's way ahead in the future, right? We're talking about what we're going to do when we meet for Bible study in 3 days, and yet he would always put this DV. Deo Volente. If God wills it, I'll see you Friday morning at 7 a.m. And what I found is over the last few years, and especially over the last few months, this whole idea of making plans but saying, if God wills, that suddenly is starting to make a whole lot more sense. So let's get into our passage together and we'll see what James has to say about making plans and what God's will might be. So we're starting in James 4, verse 13. And he says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." So this whole idea of people saying, we're going to go to this other city, and we're going to sell stuff and make a profit, this really had to do with how people would do business back in the day, right? They didn't really have box stores like Walmart or Target that they could go to buy things. Instead, what they had were people who would get items, maybe from the region that they lived in, and then they would travel to a far off city and they would kind of set up camp there. Like they would live there sometimes for months or even years at a time until they'd sold all their product. And hopefully they'd be able to make a profit, right? So they'd pack up camels and carts with all of their goods, travel to another land, and sell things. So what James is saying to these people in particular, but also to people who make these types of long-term plans is, hey, newsflash, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone a year from now, right? He says that you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Now this is tough. This is kind of a hard truth, right? What James is saying is like, you are a mist, or depending on the translation, you might say you are a vapor. Right? Think of some mornings when there's fog, right? Like when you leave your house early in the morning, and you look outside and there's this thick fog, right? You can't even necessarily see across the street sometimes. But wait a few hours, and once the sun comes up, it burns off all that fog and it disappears. And the Bible says that that is kind of what our lives are like, right? This whole idea of like vapor or mist or fog, this is used in the Old Testament a lot to describe human life. And not just our human lives, but also just the things of this world, right? They're vapors. They look solid, but you can't really grab onto them. And sometimes they're gone before you even know it. Right? And so the reality is that, life flies by. Right? When I think about the fact that I'm going to be 30 later this year, and I think about 10 years ago being 20, it has absolutely flown by. And when you speak to people who are even older, they'll say that kind of thing just continues more and more the older you get. That life just has this way of flying by. Right? And the plans that we make so often go sideways. The plans that we have don't work out the way that we thought they originally would. And here's the other thing, guys. Nothing in this life is guaranteed. And we've got a bit of a taste of that, I think, recently in the last few months with everything that's going on with the virus and the quarantine and how that's just affected our whole world. Nothing at all is guaranteed. So what should we do? Well, James says we should say, if the Lord wills, then we will do this thing or that thing, right? If God allows us to go ahead with our plans, then we will get to do them. Now, why is this so important, right? It's not that saying Lord willing, or if you want to be fancy, Deo Volente, it's not that saying those things or typing those things like my friend does are magic words that suddenly just put a good stamp on our plans. It's not simply about saying those things, although saying things can be meaningful because it's a good reminder. But it's really about our heart. It's really about our attitudes that can be wrong when it comes to our plans. In verse 16, James says, "As it is, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil." So why is it evil? Why is it sinful? Well, remember what we've been talking about for several weeks now. We've been talking about this idea of humility versus pride, right? Pride puts yourself at the center. It makes yourself the center of the universe, and everything is about what you want and what you think. But James is saying that we can't be that way even with our plans. Because assuming that we're in control of the situation is prideful. Here's an example that's kind of personal to me. So my sister is getting married. And she was supposed to be getting married in August in Ireland in a castle, believe it or not. And then they got the news that they'd have to push the date back. And then they got the news that even though they'd pushed the date back, they couldn't be in their venue. And now they've got a new place, but we're not even sure if we're able to attend. And she'd asked me to do the ceremony. It was something that I was really excited about and really looking forward to, and I still am. But I have to understand and accept that I'm only going to be able to be there and do that if the Lord is willing. Right? There are so many things that are out of my control. Not only just the spread of the virus and whether or not the airline is going to have that flight, but for all I know, I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. I could get struck by lightning. I could get sick with cancer before that even happens. And so I have to accept the fact that so much in my life is out of my control, and I can't even guarantee my sister that I will be there because it's really up to God. So what are we supposed to take out of this, right? Like, what are we supposed to do in response to what James is telling us? Well, I think we can think of holding our plans with an open hand, right? I don't think God is saying it's bad to have plans, right? You might have plans to go to school or start a trade or to travel or to start a relationship or whatever it might be. There might be all of these different things that you are wanting to do, and those things aren't necessarily wrong. What can be wrong is your attitude of expectation. That because you want this to happen, it must happen. We have to hold it with an empty hand and say, God, here's what I would like to do. Here's what I'm moving towards. Maybe it's this degree or this job or this relationship or whatever that situation might be. But understand that that can be removed. That can be changed. Now we finally get to this last verse, right? This last verse, which is a hard verse. It says, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. And that's pretty heavy. And I think this is kind of like a universal standard, really. What it's saying is, look, sin isn't just doing wrong things. It's knowing the right thing to do and not doing it. And we can take that principle and we can apply it to a whole bunch of different situations. But if we're going to keep it into this context, the context about making plans for the future, what does that mean? What is the right thing that we need to do in order to not be in sin? Well, there's a couple things. I think we need to acknowledge that God is in control, right? He is the one who's got this whole universe in his hands, right? And we have to understand our own lack of control. Doesn't mean we can't be prepared. Doesn't mean we can't do our research. Doesn't mean we can't, look forward to things. But we have to understand that so much in this life is simply out of our control. And secondly, I think what we have to do is not become so frustrated when things don't go according to our plan. When things don't happen the way that we thought or expected or wanted them to go. We have to, remember, hold it with an open hand and say, God, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I think I want and would like, but I understand that your plan is still good even if my plans fall apart. So this week I want us to be reflecting on maybe some of the things that we've lost, maybe some plans that we had for this summer. Plans to go camping or to visit family or to travel or to do all these things, and because of this whole situation we're unable to do. And I want us to go to God because maybe we've been feeling angry or frustrated or sad about those things, and go to God and say, God, I recognize that you are in control and I'm not. Help me to accept that and help me to see what your plan is for tomorrow, for a year from now, and for the rest of my life. That's all I got for today, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.